I'm Nicola Talent and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts. So Thomas Stray, I was going to call him Spray, was formerly, now I don't know how to pronounce this, Thomas Oye.
Well, I presume
Danish
that's not
or something.
It's Norwegian.
Yeah.
I presume that is definitely not how you pronounce it. But
So I found this interview he had done recently in the czechsportsagency.com. I don't know what that is.
yeah,
It was an interview with him. It was more like an advertorial feature, to be honest with you. So it says he was born in Norway. He started off his life selling encyclopedias.
yeah,
And then he kind of got into financing and he ended up bankrupt.
yeah,
Quite high profile in Denmark. The bankruptcy, in 2001, he relocated to Dubai. But in 2005, he seems to have been sentenced to 18 months, 12 months suspended for defrauding a man back in Denmark.
I think he became one of these kind of well-known wheeler dealer types.
In
Norway. We've had a
Denmark,
few,
I think.
Sorry, in Denmark. So we've had a few of our own in Ireland.
Yeah.
Like it was all by the age of 30, he seems to have gone through millions
exactly,
big investments that didn't work out.
Yeah.
And
He'd made it and lost it all.
Made it and lost it all,
30,
and seems to have been one of these Del Boy on a grand scale, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like
Now he's in his early 50s now, which I was surprised. I thought he was younger looking than that. By 2006, this Czech sports agency said he'd cleared his debt. And then they go on to do this sort of profile on him.
Yeah.
And they say in 2020, he established Endemage funds investing in disruptive technology companies.
Yeah.
What is that?
Well, I suppose disruptive technology would be something like Airbnb, which disrupted the rental market. So they're talking about that always being in fast growing sectors. And actually, interestingly, there's a report out recently from Europol talking about, criminal finance and the kind of the black economy and about how they constantly invest in constantly growing sectors like construction. Yeah.
That they never shrink these sectors, and obviously new technologies and climate change stuff at the moment is really high on their list.
Which of course was something that Christy Kinahan had a particular
before his time,
and maintained a particular interest in.
So this advertorial says that our pal Thomas Stray is providing ambitious entrepreneurs with funds in Dubai. That he's the epitome of redemption and resilience.
Right.
His story is an inspiration for young people, teaching them that when you're kicked, you get up and you try even harder. So far from being a scammer, now this profile of him says, imagine your profile saying, far from being a spoofer.
Yeah. Well,
talent is
not impossible that they would end up like that. But go ahead.
Stray is an honest, hardworking individual dedicated to making a difference in the world of business and investment.
Yeah.
Now, the reason we're talking about him and that he's hit and we'll give them a shout out for anybody who wants to look at the actual story. It's in Borden Dagbladet.
Yeah.
It's actually said the other way around in Danish, Dagbladet Borden, but the website is that.
Yeah.
Dagbladet, because I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. And the reason that they're writing about him is he is one of these personalities, these sort of tricky dicky characters that has been floating around for a long time. But his company, Endemage Funds, of course, shared an address in Suite 2101 and 2102 of the Boulevard Plaza, Tower 2, where the Kinahans were operating, and the address was listed in the sanctions. Now, before we go any further, we should say that the story in the Danish media is coming from investigative work done by Arije Wolf and Countermole, who are two
good internet sleuths.
Sleuths, I would call them citizen journalists out there. They have been pursuing in any way they can the Kinahan story, untangling the finances. They have been using technology to kind of find stuff that the Kinahan organisation have tried to delete. They are both on Twitter, and both have anything that they have done. They've become extremely reliable sources of information because anything that they have done has been checked out and has been absolutely banged to rights.
Yeah.
And Arije, Wolf certainly, and Countermole I know less about, but Arije has been operating for a good few years. I don't know where.
Yeah. But
don't know who,
no.
And we don't, and nor do we need to know.
Yeah.
They're sort of sitting in the background there, and they're doing Trojan work. Because, like, I have to say, I don't have the skill set for a lot of this stuff, for linking companies. I don't have the technological experience to be able to go back and to.
Yeah, I mean, they've done some incredible stuff.
They've done incredible stuff.
You know, in terms of any images that are posted, being able to
homing in, locating the images. Finding the dates of them through various things that are in it, using all these sort of technologies to keep these things and to keep so they can't be destroyed and removed from the internet. But I mean, so anyway, that's where the original investigation is coming from. What have you spent 35 quid on?
No, nothing. That's an ad for. I'm just so that address featured obviously in the sanctions list. It also featured in some of these leaks that was done by an international consortium of investigative journalists. Those leaks seem to suggest that not only was Daniel Kinahan renting office space there, but that he'd become a beneficial owner of that property. So this was really the Kinahan's legitimate front, I think. That business there, they had it registered.
Dukashu was the business that was listed under the sanctions by the US Treasury, and Hophu, which was the sort of the sports company that was being run by Ian Dixon, also sanctioned, a cousin of Daniel Kinahan's, who's been with him originally from Tala and who has been with him from the beginning, from the Spain days.
So as Daniel Kinahan attempted to go legitimate as as a boxing promoter or boxing manager, they wanted, I think, to have a number of legitimate companies, some legitimate ownership of stuff in order to show how wealth has come to them, even in Dubai where things are less stringent in terms of, the origin of money. So he obviously had this building. He was in and out of there. The big dispute was where was MTK and what was the difference between MTK and Daniel himself.
But of course it was in that building too.
Exactly. So, I mean, that was obviously, it was in that building while MTK were publicly saying initially that they had nothing to do with him, and then saying, yes, well, he did manage or advise some of our boxers. So in that building that the police seem to certainly believe he was the owner of that particular section of the building. There's obviously this wheeler dealer.
And the wheeler dealer was only linked to it because Arije had discovered a business card that he had given out previous to the sanctions. And on the business card was the address of the Boulevard Plaza.
Yeah.
He's changed the business address, actually, of the funds to a building in Bay Square in the Business Bay area in Dubai. But this was an old business card, and they were able to home in on it, find the address and link it back to Kinahan. And of course, then he's asked about Combat Coin. Now, this Combat Coin was something that popped up around the time or maybe in the aftermath or before the sanctions. And this was a company which was aimed at martial arts fans, and it was one project that has been linked to Daniel Kinahan.
It was like a cryptocurrency.
It was a cryptocurrency that was for MMA fans, and they were going to be able to use it to buy their seats at events which were held out in the Gulf. They were able to buy like posters and stuff like this from boxers that were involved in it.
NFTs, was it?
Go and explain that now.
No, I'm not going to.
Try.
Non-fungible tokens. So, I mean, although these, which could be an image, a digital image or something like that, where people would have the ownership. So, although these coins could be used to buy stuff, like you said,
pay for seats with it.
But really, the value of cryptocurrencies is not in what they can actually be used to buy. It's that they become something of value in themselves, and people trade them. So this is.
I think they were also going to be used to have interactive meetings with some of the fighters.
Yeah, but I think the real core of it was to set up a cryptocurrency that could be traded,
absolutely,
and not just used. That it could be traded between people who'd never cash in on the value of it. I suppose. I mean, it was set up at the height of the cryptocurrency boom. You had incredible, values being attached to cryptocurrencies. Now, obviously, some of that has gone totally awry.
It was a very high-profile launch for this combat coin, and at it were Sonny Edwards,
a
boxer who has been very vocal in his support for Daniel Kinahan. Ben Davison, the former manager of Tyson Fury, who has been very supportive voice for Daniel Kinahan. Josh Taylor, a very supportive voice for Daniel Kinahan. Lee McGregor, Darren Till, an incredibly supportive voice for Daniel Kinahan, and somebody who was photographed with him. I think, in actual fact, the first photograph that came out of Dubai was Kinahan with Till. Joan O'Carroll, again, very well-known supporter of Daniel Kinahan, and Terence Crawford. Now, Eddie Hearn was also at the launch of it.
Yeah. So, I mean, all those boxers were associated with MTK, and many of them had spoken about Daniel Kinahan being a great manager. Obviously, none of them are suspected of being involved in crime in any way, but they were all professionally linked to Daniel through the boxing, and they were the people who'd sort of come out on social media and spoken about him in glowing terms. So that was the launch.
It's interesting when you look at this sort of very complex network that the Kinahans have set up, and they've had all this time and all this money and everything to create layers between them and everything else. But I suppose ultimately they have to be there somewhere.
Yeah.
And Dukashu Trading, of course, had listed Daniel Kinahan as a director, which is how the US Treasury were able to list it in the sanctions. But to see the ties between MTK, the boxing, and Dukashu, and the ties between Daniel Kinahan and MTK was quite easy, because Sandra Vaughan had been listed as a director. And of course, Sandra Vaughan was the main woman in MTK. She was the woman who came forward, this former Scottish businesswoman, owner of Fake Bake, who had links to the Kinahans way back through an ex-partner in Spain. And who showed up as the woman who bought outright, we were told, MGM, the original name of that boxing company, from Kinahan and from Matthew Macklin. And the reason that it was bought and the name was changed was to sort of because of this very unfair media around Daniel Kinahan. And himself and Macklin decided it was time to step back and to sell it in full, we were told, to Sandra Vaughan. For years after that, there was a media ban, an Irish media ban, that no Irish media were allowed speak to any of the boxers or report on anything, or certainly weren't going to be helped doing that. And that was in a temper, because the news media wouldn't play ball and sort of leave it go that Daniel Kinahan was the original founder of this company. And every time MTK was mentioned, of course, it was linked to Daniel Kinahan. So Sandra Vaughan got very antsy in Dubai and used to have these videos that were sent out on social media and interviews where she would criticise the Irish media and the Irish in general initially for linking Daniel Kinahan to the boxing, and afterwards when he decided to come forward and link himself to the boxing and back to MTK, it was because Ireland had
embracing him as a hero, as a guy who'd done good.
Yeah, he'd come from nothing, and he was one of the most important people now in boxing. And this was really in the years before the sanctions, when it looked like yes he was, and yes he was going to get away with it, and he had transitioned. So that's the combat chain. Now we'll go back to Thomas Stray, because the reason we're talking about him is not just because he shared an address with Daniel Kinahan, but he's actually been asked a couple of questions by the Danish media outlet Borden Dagbladet, and he's answered them. And they asked him, first of all, did he know Daniel Kinahan?
Yeah, and he says, although I knew Daniel Kinahan through shared office space, I had no personal or professional ties to him, others in the Kinahan family, or any association with his business. Although I knew about him, I was unaware of his background until it became widely known. Which is, what they all like to say,
Yes.
as if it's only become widely known when they were sanctioned.
Did they ever hear of Google?
Yeah. I mean, exactly. I mean, ever hear of Panorama on the BBC?
Yeah.
Or did they ever hear about, anything, any
Yes.
number of publications across the world who've written about the Kinahan cartel in advance of the sanctions being placed on them.
So yes, he's basically saying his time at the address was strictly professional. He said he left the address in 2019. It was only a serviced office. He's asked about this combat change, this currency, this cryptocurrency that Kinahan essentially attempted to set up. And he says he was approached about developing a website for a crypto currency, but the project came to nothing. There was no business transactions. And again, he says he was only aware of Daniel Kinahan through media reporting.
Yeah.
In the aftermath, I think that was, of the sanctions. Going back to the combat coin, and you can see it through the work again done by Arije Wolf and Countermole. There was a Telegram sort of communication channel set up, and the first postings visible on it, and this is all kept in the threads of those two Twitter accounts, shows this ex-MMA fighter Tom Khan adding Dan Private and then Sandra V to the communication, and TK MMA Fit, a gym in Dubai, started tagging this combat coin the day before Daniel Kinahan was pictured with Tyson Fury.
Yeah, in that gym. Yeah.
So, yes, there's all these ties. You see, it's like a kind of a jigsaw, isn't it? Everything, and you're trying to piece together the picture of who is who. I mean, if you would think of looking at the financial networks of the Kinahans, I mean, the criminal offences that they are suspected of is one thing, but separate that from the money network.
Yeah.
And you have this complex and yet not rocket science stuff going on, really.
And of course,
because the links are through simple things like addresses, through company directorships. The fact of the matter is that while Sandra Vaughan held a very important place in MTK, and while others were named as the kind of the owners of the company, Kinahan always stayed there in the background, very much linked to it. No doubt the money laundering investigations that are ongoing into the Kinahan network are very much focused on the finances all around him and whatever he was linked to. But I suppose that's, if their money, for example, I'm speaking hypothetically here now, if the Kinahan money was being washed through boxing, they're not going to just push it through and stand back completely. They need some sort of a call on it, don't they?
Well, I suppose they do. And I'd say Daniel has a kind of a controlling aspect anyway, whether but of course, there's nobody charged in any connection with any of that suspected money laundering. I did
an interesting chat this week with Tris Dixon, and he has actually just posted a story up on it. Tris Dixon, proboxtv.com, he's writing for. So Tris Dixon is a boxing writer. He was actually on the Panorama documentary. He's a very well-respected boxing writer. And we were discussing basically how far the authorities are going to delve into boxing. He knows, I always say from the start, I know very little about boxing other than the criminal sort of aspect of it. I wouldn't know a single thing about it otherwise. But, we were talking about, because of Kinahan's involvement in it, are any of these suspected boxers and promoters and that have worked with him, and since the sanctioning, are they worried? Have they stepped back? Or is Daniel Kinahan still involved in boxing? And anybody who knows anything about boxing tells you that he is still very much involved, despite the sanctions, despite everything else. And of course, I was explaining to Tris that from what I know of the personality that is Daniel Kinahan, and it's complex, but he's very convincing to people. He's a manipulator. He's a fraudster, really, just like his own father.
Yeah.
He's all the other things, like an international multi-millionaire, billionaire drug lord. But he's ultimately, and at the heart of him, he is a fraudster and a very manipulative character. And when we go back as far as Operation Shovel in 2010, and we were told that the Kinahan organisation were taken down, the top of the Kinahan organisation, he and his father and his brother told everyone, carry on regardless, we're going to beat this.
Yeah.
We are going to beat this. And initially there was panic and everybody was starting to kind of pull away and run a mile. But no, they insisted we're going to beat it. And what happened? They beat it.
Yeah.
It was a disaster in so many ways, and not just for for the authorities. It was a disaster because it embedded that message from the Kinahan organisation in all their foot soldiers that they say they can beat it and they can.
Yeah.
And Daniel Kinahan will have gone into boxing with that same confidence and that same approach that what he says goes.
Yeah.
Now, when you look how far he got before the sanctions, and he was telling everybody along the way, don't worry about it. There's nothing to see here.
Yeah.
I've no convictions. I'm fine. He convinced everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody from the very, very top of boxing. Not everybody, of course, because there is a big divide.
Yeah.
And Tris Dixon explained that to me, that there's a divide within boxing. There's all this sort of supporters of Kinahan still there,
Yeah.
and still kind of confident in a way. And then there's all the people who didn't go with him and who were honest. And there's been this complete and utter skew in the value of what people are worth and everything.
Obviously the supporters were very, very vocal of him at that stage, and the detractors didn't feel comfortable for obvious reasons speaking out about Daniel Kinahan, and you had very few within the boxing world, though people would speak off the record.
They were terrified.
Yeah, they were terrified. So I mean, he was able to rise so high, partly because of where he was based in Dubai, where it was Wild West.
There's very obvious stuff still going on, and we won't go into it on this. We'd probably need somebody more expert than ourselves, but it's very obvious what's still going on and where Daniel Kinahan's tentacles are in boxing still. It's extremely obvious. You only have to look at a card on something and you know that he's there in the background. But I suppose for our listeners to describe it as the bite of a snake, and that poison is still in the ecosystem of boxing.
Yeah.
It's not that it's not that it ended with the sanctions.
No.
And of course, Daniel Kinahan is still fighting for his survival.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not going to lie down and be picked up and thrown into a jail cell. He is out there. He is still using his money and his influence to remain free in the United Arab Emirates.
And some of his freedom depends on, I think, on that sports world.
Of course it does. That's what he's bringing to the table.
That's what he's bringing to the table. So there's many people involved with him in terms of legitimacy, but the boxing world, you're hearing loads all the time about his...
See, I suppose it's the question is really for the ones who didn't take the blood money.
Yeah.
Are the ones who did, is it still going to be this unfair platform going forward?
Yeah.
Where those who have taken Kinahan's money are just going to get away with it? Or are they going to be investigated? Is the money trail going to be followed deep into the heart of boxing? And I would say yes, it is.
But is it going to be followed all the way to Dubai? I would suggest possibly not.
Well, you see, that is the problem. That is the problem because, that's exactly what I was saying to Tris Dixon. Where does the money trail go? Because even from a simple point of view, when MGM at the time and after the raids on that premises in Portabanús in September of 2016 happened, just weeks before that, before the police, the Guardia Civil burst their way in there, we could see that they had moved all the intellectual property rights out to Dubai to a free trade zone, and we could see nothing else.
Yeah.
It was like you can just see they're gone and then there's a block. Having said that, you would consider that... is the money going to just stay out there, and is it going to just go into the ether? Is it going to stay within boxing? There's been people paid by the Kinahan organisation back in Ireland, back in the UK. There's people who are paid within Daniel Kinahan's criminal network and are continuously getting paid, particularly the people in the prisons. And there's people who are more legitimate that have been paid by his money. So as the trail comes back from the Gulf and back into sort of more legitimate societies where there is a possibility of investigating it, you'd like to think
Well, I think a lot of it will depend.
That there is some investigation going on into that money.
I'm sure there is, and I think we'll see if there's, what digital messages, where those lead. I think when it comes to money, that's a whole other question. What exists there? What has been accessed? And does that form part of the attempt to extradite Daniel and his father and brother from Dubai?
So what we know is when Daniel and Christopher Jr. went out to Dubai initially in 2016, they were allowed to set up companies, and that the Emiratis deemed them low risk, despite the fact that they were, despite the coverage really at that time of what was going on. And in Dubai, they initially set up food companies, clothing companies, and, business service companies for the private sector. They formed management companies and an aviation consultancy, all in these Emirati free zones, which we'll call a black hole really of information, because we can't get anywhere from there. But they settled in, and they, Kinahan obviously was working behind the scenes with the boxing and drawing more and more of that sport out to the Gulf. He then was announced as a director of a Bahraini sports company by a son of a royal in Bahrain. And very quickly after that announcement, he was, within a week, I think, he was taken off the books again. But I think what that showed was his connections deep into the Gulf at that stage. This sports company was state funded, I think, largely. This was a kind of one of these bratish sons of a royal in Bahrain. And clearly he'd made a personal connection. He was kind of a boxing fan himself.
Yeah, I think an MMA fan and boxing fan, combat sports fan.
And chose to announce Daniel Kinahan as his advisor or his company director, whatever it was. We later saw him with the Pakistani sports minister, posing for pictures. Where was it that he went with Bob Arum, and they were at a gala dinner?
That was in Eastern Europe somewhere, wasn't it? Was it in Uzbekistan? I think.
Yeah, so he was in Uzbekistan at that gala dinner where he was applauded because he bought something at auction for
a Champions League final football for charity at a charity auction for a six-figure sum, I think.
Yeah. So, that's how sort of deeply embedded he got.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's where the tentacles of the business and where the money goes. The bigger they've become, the more complex their money laundering
and
aspects
of course,
have been.
Unlike people like his contemporaries, Ridwan Taghi and Rafael Imperiale, he was employing through his sports businesses loads of local guys, people from within that society, Dubai natives, people with connections, and all of that counts for a lot in that country by all accounts.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's obviously still a little bit more to untangle there. I thought it was interesting when you looked at, for example, the UAE is now on this grey list by the Financial Action Task Force. They're looking to come off that. Are they gone black? Are they?
No, I think it's been described as a blacklist or a grey list, but it's basically it's a list done up by the EU for countries that are not regarded as being safe in connection with money laundering and financial mismanagement, I suppose. And
part of that, will relate, of course, to the interest of the US authorities in Haziam General Trading Limited, which was the first company that Daniel and Christopher Jr. set up out there. They actually set that up in this free trade zone. Haziam General Trading Limited was called, and that was for what I described as the food and the clothing and all the rest of it. And they had a Pakistani native called Sarfraz Ali Riast, who became the power of attorney over their company. Now, with a little bit of digging, it looks as if between sort of 2016 and the sanctions, they had set up 200 companies in 20 different countries.
Yeah.
All of which are in these sort of, we call them unfriendly territories when it comes to law enforcement, when it comes to, getting the information, the directorships and what's going on and where the money is going, etc. So that's the kind of level of investigation that's been untangled. But I do think that you can be sure that if there is money that has gone into boxing, that the authorities will follow the trail as much as they can. And particularly, I think if it comes back to, say, the UK, to Ireland, to the US, of course, and anywhere else.
Yeah.
And of course, while Daniel Kinahan was luring boxing and other, and sport out to the Gulf for his own purposes and for his ongoing friendship with the United Arab Emirates authorities, a lot of the money and their business was still based in Europe.
Yeah.
200 million was washed through Johnny Morrissey.
Yeah.
It is suspected in Spain. So, it's not as if they've taken all their money and kept it in the Gulf, because no doubt they don't fully trust that.
No, and I mean, they
cannot fully trust. They aren't part of those countries, really.
No.
They're outsiders, and they have to keep their eggs in different baskets. You'd imagine when you're dealing with that much, you're dealing with £1 billion.
Yeah.
You're not going to pump it all into the Gulf.
No, and I mean, they have to have the movement of money as well in order to pay people and pay their own debts and pay whoever they're paying in South America. So they need to be able to move that money around.
Exactly.
So first they want to clean it, and then they want to be able to move it around in, seemingly legitimate payments. A very, very complicated business, no doubt.
Now, you and I might owe one another 50 quid or 100 quid every now and then, or whatever it is. And I think that's kind of as normal as it gets. But in the UK last week, Louis Edwards, who is part of the Kinahan UK operation. I think this really shows the kind of money you're talking about and where did the zeros stop. But Edwards was arrested last year in Benidorm, where he had fled after his cocaine business was targeted in Portsmouth by police in the UK. He was a kind of a branch of the Kinahan organisation in Portsmouth, bringing in a lot of cocaine, was targeted, he went on the run. Anyway, he was arrested, and at the time he was arrested, we were told that he owed 20 million to the Kinahans and would no longer be able to pay it back. So
he was a classic kind of Kinahan franchise owner, because he had they all had a very similar modus operandi he had altered vehicles to hide cocaine shipments. He was moving around the same places they were, and he obviously had a degree of authority, but he was regarded as one of the biggest players in the UK drug scene. And his arrest, when he was arrested in Spain, he was put out as being one of the most wanted men. So he's now in prison. I think he got 18 years, which is, they tend to get out.
Serve 9 on license.
Yeah. So how are they going to get that money out of him?
Yeah.
I mean, he's in a prison there, I don't know, probably somewhere near where he lives. They're not going to have the tentacles in there. Does he have the money? Probably not.
You can pick somebody up and shake them by their ankles and the coins will pop out of their pockets. But in the end of the day, if they don't have it, they don't have it. I mean, 20 million is a lot
and
to put your hands on.
No, and can they put their hands on him to threaten him to get it? Is he going to be sitting in jail thinking, I'll worry about it in 9 years' time when I get out and see if they're still floating around?
Well, you see, of course, what I've heard is that they have been trying to call in the debts all over the place, that they are owed a lot of money. And that there is an attitude to them that they're going under. They're a sinking ship and people don't want to pay. And they have been really hit by, no matter what, while they might have, all these investments and all the rest of it, the fact of the matter is they've been hit each way by the US sanctions, which has created a toxicity around them for people dealing with them. And by all the focus on and the intelligence coming out of the organisation and the big shipments that have been nabbed.
Yeah.
Because
they need...
That's a loss to them each time.
And they need the threats to be able to collect debts. I mean, it's just as simple as that. They need to have the threat of violence hanging over, for example, Louis Edwards, and we're supposing, he needs to be in fear in order to pay up.
Mm-hmm.
And would somebody like him think, how are they going to get at me now? And I'll just wait it out and see what happens. And I think that's what we're hearing, that people are doing that all over the place.
Because, of course, the landscape will have changed within the next year and their fate, I suppose, will have been decided certainly by I would imagine early in 2024. And how sort of threatening are they if they're before the courts facing life in prison?
Yeah.
That's the end of it for them.
That's the end of it.
Yeah.
It was interesting, actually, the John Gilligan thing, which we talked about a lot. But didn't he, when he came out of prison, he had to go to, after whatever it was, 15 years, he went around then and tried to collect his debts. And that's what got him in trouble.
Yeah.
So, but he didn't have the capacity, obviously, to get them when he was in jail. And those guys, by the time he got out, you know, they were no more inclined to pay him than they would be give me money, you know.
And power has pivoted.
Yeah.
And it's with somebody else, and that's how it goes. It's definitely a fickle world.
Yeah.
The underworld. Well, anyway, that is complex enough, but you know, as the information keeps coming forward, and as people like Orija and Countermole keep working away in the background there.
And it does look like every chancer, every wheeler-dealer chancer ends up in Dubai.
Yeah. And, you know, near enough to the Kinahans, really. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like everywhere you look, their connections, they're just, you get a name and you Google it.
Yeah.
And you go, like again, Stray, Thomas Stray, or Oye, whatever your name is.
Yeah.
Why didn't you use Google?
I'm sure
we're getting mixed up in, my friend.
I'm sure I'm not so convinced that he didn't use Google.
Exactly. All right. Well, we'll leave it at that for the moment.
Thanks, Nicola.